If you found this key, it means I'm no longer able to tell you myself." Just one line in a hidden letter, and the billion-dollar empire began to collapse. 3 years after her son's mysterious death, billionaire Eleanor stumbles upon a child with the exact same gaze as him. But behind those familiar eyes lies a horrifying truth she spent her whole life burying. And the person who unearths it all, the waitress she once looked down on most. On a gray November morning, with a veil of misty rain draping the road that led to the small Arlington Cemetery just outside Boston, Eleanor Whitman sat quietly inside her sleek black Bentley. She clutched a bouquet of white tulips in her gloved hands. Every year, on this exact day, the day her only son died, Eleanor came here. Same time, same flowers, same ritual. Only this morning, something was very different. A silhouette stopped her in her tracks the moment the wrought iron gate swung open. On the slick marble stone, before a grave engraved in silver. Nathaniel Whitman, 1989-2020. A young woman knelt. She wore a waitress uniform, arms wrapped around a boy no older than 4, soft brown curls, a round face, and eyes the color of emeralds, green eyes that pierced like a blade, eyes identical to Nathaniel's. Eleanor stepped out of the car, heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. Her heart constricted, but her voice remained cold as ever. "Excuse me, this is my family's plot. Who are you?" The young woman rose, trembling, but not afraid. "I'm Alina Brooks, and this is Ethan, Nathaniel's son." A gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying her words like a curse to Eleanor's feet. She staggered slightly, as if time itself had paused. Nathaniel had a child? Impossible. Not once had the team of private investigators she hired ever mentioned this. No notes, no calls, no messages. And then those eyes, those unmistakable eyes, that same green fire staring up at her, just as Nathaniel did when he was 4. How old is the boy?" Eleanor asked, her voice faltering for the first time. 4.5, Alina replied. Eleanor's grip tightened on the tulips. Nathaniel died 3 years ago. Subtract a year and a half. That meant Ethan had been conceived just before that fateful night. The rain began to ease, now only a few droplets falling onto the cold stone. In Ethan's small hands was a photograph, folded into quarters. Nathaniel smiling, arm around Alina. The summer glow blurred everything except the raw sincerity of his expression. Why didn't I know about you?" Eleanor whispered, barely aware of her own voice. Alina looked down at Ethan, then answered quietly, "Because you never asked." Eleanor's gold watch buzzed gently. 9:00 a.m., sharp. The time she always laid her flowers, turned back to the car, and left. But today, she stayed longer, eyes fixed on the boy with the green eyes, curly hair, and that fearless, open smile. Ethan looked up, reaching out to touch the worn silver wedding ring Eleanor had worn since Nathaniel's death. "Are you, my daddy's mommy?" he asked. The question, so simple and innocent, unlocked something cold and rusted deep inside Eleanor. She didn't answer. She simply nodded. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor didn't turn away after laying the flowers. She watched Alina carry Ethan out of the cemetery, steps quiet but steady. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitman felt something foreign settle over her, the realization that she no longer controlled everything. As the Bentley rolled past the iron gate, Eleanor looked back at the grave. Beside the bouquet of white tulips lay a child's wax crayon drawing, left by Ethan. In it, Nathaniel stood hand in hand with a curly-haired woman and a small boy, beneath a smiling sun. A child's sketch, yet it pierced Eleanor's heart deeper than any confidential report ever could. She whispered the girl's name under her breath. Alina Brooks. 2 weeks after the strange encounter at the cemetery, Eleanor Whitman sat in her glass-walled office on the 48th floor of Whitman Tower, the headquarters of the empire she had built from nothing. Everything here gleamed, orderly, pristine, controllable. On the screen before her was a digital profile of one, Alina Renee Brooks. Born 1993, average high school graduate, one unfinished semester in education at Bunker Hill Community College. Currently working part-time as a waitress at Morning Dew Cafe, also moonlighting as a night nanny. Dress, third-floor unit in a crumbling South End apartment block. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the cold stone desk. Nothing remarkable, No advanced degrees, no stable career, no powerful connections, and yet she was raising a child who carried Whitman blood, and that, for Eleanor, was a problem. "She has nothing," Eleanor murmured, voice soft but calculating. "And yet she's raising Nathaniel's son like it's her right." "There's no birth certificate listing Nathaniel as the legal father." David Kane, her longtime assistant, adjusted his glasses. "Ethan carries her last name, Brooks." Eleanor didn't respond. She stared at the candid photo taken at the cemetery. Alina, Ethan, and not Nathaniel himself, but his reflection, reborn in the boy's eyes. "Arrange a meeting, private, tomorrow, 3 o'clock, she ordered. David nodded, no questions asked. Room 12A, auxiliary conference room, 27th floor. Alina stepped into the steel and glass space like a trespasser in another world. She wore a second-hand gray suit dress, clutching a worn canvas bag with frayed straps. She stood tall, though a slight tremble betrayed her nerves. Eleanor waited, statuesque, a queen on the battlefield. "Sit," she said. No gesture, no blink. "I thought you wanted to see Ethan," Alina said as she took the seat across from her, hand still holding the bag in her lap. "I want to know what made you think you had the right to keep my grandson," Eleanor replied, her voice as even as a boardroom clause. Alina didn't flinch. "I didn't keep him. I raised him. You're welcome to visit. If Ethan wants to see you." Eleanor leaned forward and slid an envelope across the table. $300,000, wired immediately. You can see him on weekends, all legally arranged. Alina didn't touch it. Her lips pressed tight, her gaze steady. "Ethan isn't a transaction. He is my blood," Eleanor snapped. "Then why didn't Nathaniel ever tell you about me, about Ethan?" The question struck like a velvet-coated bullet. Eleanor's first response was silence. "You didn't know him," she whispered, voice uncharacteristically soft. "I knew him better than you think," Alina said, "and he knew his mother better than she ever tried to know him." Outside the glass wall, Boston sank into its quiet winter dusk. Inside, two women, one who had lost a son and one protecting hers, sat across from each other, two sides of a shared tragedy. "Do you have proof?" Eleanor finally asked, clinging to the last thread of rational control. Alina stood. From her canvas bag, she pulled out one thing, a small silver key and a crumpled piece of paper. "This opens the drawer in Nathaniel's private photo studio. I don't have the right to open it, but Ethan does." "And I'm supposed to believe you?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "No," Alina said simply, her voice weightless. "You don't have to believe me, but maybe. You should believe your son, the one who kept this secret from you for the last 3 years of his life." Alina turned and walked out, leaving Eleanor alone with the key. It was cold in her palm, like metal buried in snow, and heavy with all the words that had never been said. A week after the icy meeting at the office, Eleanor Whitman sat alone inside the secured archives room of Whitman Tower, a space housing documents not even lawyers were allowed to touch without her passcode. On the table lay the small silver key Alina had given her, quiet beside a handwritten letter from Nathaniel, his familiar script tilted and firm. "If you found this key, it means I could no longer say this to you myself, but I chose Alina, and I want you to respect that. You don't have to believe her. Just open the drawer." Eleanor held the letter in trembling hands. There was no date, but at the bottom, a smudged blot of ink, as if Nathaniel had written it through a wave of emotion or fear. That night, in a modest South End apartment, Alina hosted 3 guests. They weren't friends. They weren't neighbors. They were allies, people Eleanor Whitman had once hurt, and who now stood ready to help Alina bring the truth into the light. Sitting beside her were Dr. Juliet Harlan, head of Harvard Law School and one of Nathaniel's former professors; Miguel Ortega, an investigative journalist known for exposing large-scale money laundering networks; Henrietta Brooks, Alina's aunt and former chief accountant at Whitman Industries, forced to resign in 1999 under accusations of ethical violations that were never substantiated. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Juliet asked, her voice low. "Accusing a billionaire of laundering money, obstructing justice, and possibly being connected to her own son's death. This isn't courtroom drama." Alina nodded. On the table sat a black USB stick. Nathaniel had hidden it in Ethan's toy music box. Nathaniel knew, and he tried to expose his mother, Alina said, eyes fixed on the drive. He was a whistleblower, but he was never allowed to speak. Henrietta slid forward a brown file folder labeled 1994, Internal Audit Committee. Inside was a scanned photo. Eleanor clutching a stack of papers with an icy glare. Opposite her stood a man, Robert Brooks, Alina's biological father, signing away his inheritance rights. Beneath it, a chilling note: sign or lose everything. She manipulated my father out of the family, Henrietta said, hands shaking but eyes fierce. And with Nathaniel, she never stopped. Monday morning, Eleanor received a message from David Kane. Wallace and Harlan has filed a petition for restricted contact between you and the boy, Ethan. Grounds: potential psychological harm. Eleanor slammed her porcelain cup against the desk. Shards flew, some from rage, some from fear, because Eleanor knew one thing: Wallace and Harlan never took a case, unless the evidence was devastating. Meanwhile, headlines began to circulate. Whitman Industries accused of multi-state investment fraud, suspected money laundering, and government bribery under investigation. That evening, Eleanor turned on the television and froze. An old photo flashed on screen. 94, with Robert Brooks signing that waiver. Beneath it, the caption read, "The man in the photo, father of Alina Brooks, was allegedly coerced into exiting Whitman Industries." On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForNathaniel began spreading like wildfire. In the South End apartment, little Ethan, his emerald eyes glowing, sat on the floor arranging puzzle pieces. Beside him, Alina held a scanned copy of Nathaniel's final letter to her. "If you're reading this, I may have failed, but I believe you're stronger than anything my mother ever built. You don't need to defeat her, just protect Ethan at any cost." Alina folded the letter gently, laying it beside her son. "You know," she whispered, "your father was once afraid of his mother, but he was never afraid of the truth." Boston Federal Court, Thursday. Outside, a mob of reporters pressed in beneath the glowing red marquee. Case: Brooks versus Whitman Industries. Petition for custody and allegations of financial abuse at the highest level. Inside, Eleanor Whitman, her silver hair perfectly set, charcoal trench coat immaculately tailored, walked into the courtroom with eyes sharp as blades. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't there as the honored guest. She was the defendant. Across the aisle, Alina Brooks sat between lead attorney Juliet Harlan and her aunt, Henrietta. Ethan remained in a separate waiting room, per the judge's order. Around Alina's wrist was the silver bracelet Nathaniel had once given her. In her pocket, his final handwritten letter remained. Not legal evidence, but the evidence of a heart. Attorney Juliet rose, voice cold as steel. "Your Honor, we are not only requesting restricted contact between Eleanor Whitman and the child Ethan, but also a full investigation into money laundering, bribery, and financial concealment carried out under Ms. Whitman's direct command at Whitman Industries." The courtroom stirred in collective shock. Juliet walked to the evidence stand and opened a file. "We submit the following. 1. A USB drive containing covert financial transactions from 2015-2019. 2. Recorded conversations between Mr. Nathaniel Whitman and his legal advisor, indicating his intent to expose misconduct within the company, misconduct by his own mother. 3. A scanned handwritten letter from Nathaniel stored in a private vault, authenticated via handwriting analysis and fingerprint trace." Eleanor didn't flinch, but in her eyes, a fracture formed, barely visible, like the first crack in ice. In response, Eleanor's legal team attempted to strike back. "Your Honor, the evidence is highly emotional and unverifiable. USB drives can be tampered with, and there is no conclusive proof that Ethan is Nathaniel's biological son." Alina stood, calm, composed, her voice unwavering. She held up a sealed envelope. "I didn't intend to present this, but if they want proof, this is a certified DNA test, matching Ethan with hair samples taken from Nathaniel during the official autopsy 3 years ago." The judge nodded. A court officer stepped forward to receive the document. At the same moment, Henrietta requested to speak. She handed over a 1994 internal memo with one damning line. "Robert Brooks, inheritance risk. Recommended removal from shareholder list. Approved by Eleanor Whitman. Silence swallowed the room. Eleanor closed her eyes, and in that fleeting instant, she looked tired. Then, a chair scraped. An elderly man with snow-white hair entered, leaning on a polished ebony cane. Senator Charles Mayweather, a longtime public supporter of Eleanor's philanthropic work. "Your Honor, I ask to testify voluntarily," he said loudly. "Ms. Whitman once funneled $2.5 million to my private foundation through a shell company after a key legislative vote in 2018. Eleanor whipped her head toward her attorney. "He promised silence." The attorney said nothing. At this point, trust was a currency long spent. The court recessed. Eleanor stepped into a private chamber with David Kane. "I can buy us time. You just need to stay silent," David said, ever the professional. But for once, Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze rested on her hands, the same hands that had signed every contract, dictated every life. Now trembling. On the table sat an old photo. Nathaniel, Alina, and Ethan, sitting by a lake. Her son's smile, not a press release smile, but the smile of a father. "I lost my son," Eleanor whispered. "To power, to control. You can still save what's left," David said softly. She looked up at him, and for the first time those piercing green eyes welled with tears. That afternoon, Eleanor Whitman took the witness stand, alone, no attorney by her side. She requested to represent herself. The courtroom held its breath. "I don't deny I've manipulated people. I called Nathaniel my son, but I never once asked him what he wanted. I used to think money was love, that power was protection. But today, I see now, I'm just a lonely old woman, terrified of losing control. If the court allows it, I wish to relinquish all legal claims over Ethan. In exchange, let the boy live the life his mother chose for him, one without my shadow in it." Silence fell, soft and heavy as snowfall. Alina looked at her, eyes damp, lips parted, but said nothing. Autumn in Vermont arrived like a whisper, gentle, crisp, but startlingly clear. In a small wooden cabin by Echo Lake, the morning began with the off-key but earnest sound of a child playing the violin. Alina Brooks stood by the window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, eyes watching her son run barefoot across the lawn. Ethan, now 7, dashed through the grass, his emerald eyes sparkling in the morning light. His tousled curls bounced with every step, the tiny violin slung on his back like a natural part of him. In this home there were no luxury furnishings, but something had remained: memory. On the pine wood wall, framed between Alina's Master of Laws diploma, hung a faded photograph. Nathaniel smiling, holding newborn Ethan in his arms. His face was lit with something rare in those born into Eleanor's world, a light called choice. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Alina sat alone in her small study. On the desk sat an old recorder containing a voice memo Nathaniel had hidden in a wooden box for 7 years. His voice played, slightly hoarse but unmistakably steady. "I know Mother's watching me. I know about the people she sent, but I won't stop. I used to be part of her system until I met Alina. Now I know some things can't be bargained with. Stock options, legacy, none of it's worth your soul. I don't want to be the heir, not if the price is myself." There was a pause, then his voice lower, heavier. "If I disappear, call it by its name. Don't let her call it an accident." Alina stopped the tape. She didn't play the final segment. She didn't need to. Ethan wasn't ready to hear it all, but she had lived with that truth for 7 years. Nathaniel hadn't died by accident. He had died because he dared to choose a path his mother never paved. Far away, in the white stillness of Danbury Federal Prison, Eleanor Whitman sat before a blank page, pen in hand, her silver hair tied neatly back. She wrote her monthly letter to Alina, not commands, not pride disguised apologies, just a few short lines. "I have nothing left to offer Ethan except my absence. If one day he wishes to see me, I'll be here. If not, I understand." Eleanor had lost her empire, but she had salvaged one thing, however late: the ability to feel remorse. A week later, Ethan looked up from the dinner table and asked, "Mom, how come I don't have grandparents like my friends do?" Alina sat beside him, gently smoothing his curls. "You do. But once, someone was so afraid of losing control, she forgot how to love. And by the time she remembered, It was too late. Ethan said nothing. He ran to his room, rummaged through his drawer, and returned with a new drawing. 3 people, 1 man, 1 woman, and an old lady with silver hair, standing under a sky full of stars, all of them smiling. I redrew it, Mom. This time, she's smiling too. Alina hugged him tightly. She didn't need to correct a thing. In that drawing, past, present, and future had found one another, not through blood, but through forgiveness. As dusk fell, Ethan leaned against his mother, softly scratching his violin, clumsy, imperfect, but full of hope. And outside the window, maple leaves spun gently in the breeze, as if time itself were learning to let go. In that cabin by the lake, there were no threats, no bribes, no gilded contracts, only a mother, a child, and a silent promise that the boy would grow up not to inherit a fortune, but to carry on a legacy of courage, justice, and unconditional love.